and introduce ourselves. So thank you for joining us. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Louise Caron. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Art Law. Thank you for joining us in this wonderful digital space. Welcome to also our first Art Law Lunch Talk of 2021. Thank you to our speakers, Judith Prowda and Professor Lazerow, whom Irina Tarsis, the center's founder and today's moderator, will introduce in more details shortly. Thank you also to our interns, including Lucy Siegel, who's in the room right now, who helped in putting this program and the reading materials together. So if this is the first time that you are joining the Center for Art Law for one of our events, let me say a few words about this wonderful organization. We are a Brooklyn-based research and education nonprofit dedicated to offering resources and programming for the advancement of a vibrant arts and law community worldwide. Through our website, our newsletter, our events, we disseminate information and keep our audience updated on art law related news, programs, cases, publications, and so much more. Now fully online, the center facilitates conversations by hosting and participating in programs such as today. And we also have a great internship program that allows students to get a first-hand education and experience in art and cultural heritage law, which is very fitting for today's program. So we invite you to become a subscriber to our website, or excuse me, our newsletter. And you can, if you can, please make a donation to support our efforts in making art law accessible. Before we begin, a few of the usual housekeeping items. This program is currently recording for archival purposes, so feel free to turn off your camera if you don't feel comfortable being recorded, and please remain muted to prevent any background noises. We will be taking questions during the program. Please ask them using the chat box on the bottom left corner. A link to the handouts with bios and reading materials was sent to you earlier today, and I will put it in the chat also shortly. They will be emailed to you again after the program, along with the slides and a brief survey, which we'd appreciate that you take. So the results will allow us to bring together more events and more programs of interest to you. On that note, we have more art law lunch talks in the works, including a conversation about legal issues in public art on February 17th, a discussion about taxes and appraisal of art on March 3rd, and a talk about fraudsters and the art market on March 10th. So as you can see, the next 3 months, very busy. Make sure that to save the dates also for our biennial online art and law auctions from February 15 through March 1st, which will take place with capsule auctions. Will feature over 50 lots donated by artists, collectors, colleagues, and friends. And this year we'll also be sharing 10% of the proceeds with each donating artists. So your support will not only allow the center to continue its programming, but also to sustain a global economy within the arts community. So just before we go on with the program, I'll put on a brief poll on the screen and we'll give everyone a minute to tell us where you're calling from and what is your occupation. All right. I see answers coming in. Thank you for taking the poll. All right, I think we're in very good shape. Thank you for taking the poll. I will share the results right now. Can you, I hope everybody can see them. We have actually almost 50% of our people here are from outside of the US. So I'm actually really glad that this is something we're doing. The Art Law Lunch Talks bring together people from not only New York, but also across the globe. So thank you. And I see that we have an equal number of people coming for the first time. So welcome. And we have a good number of students as well as some faculty members and professionals. So Thank you for joining. Now, without further ado, let me introduce Irina Tarsis, the founder and managing director of the Center for Art Law, who will present the speakers and get the conversation started. Take it away, Irina.
Hi, hello everybody. I am thrilled to be welcoming you to our first event of 2021. The idea of talking about teaching art law has been in my mind for a while, probably since I was a student myself in law school, where I went with the idea of becoming an art lawyer. And I learned that the tradition for art lawyers was actually falling into this field. So the question was, is there such a thing as art law? How do you get into art law? Do you need to be a lawyer to matter in this field or not? So I had lots of questions, and I'm thrilled to be hosting and inviting this conversation to proceed. It is really humbling to have a lot of educators on this webinar, and we are really looking forward to your questions and input. Everybody here has something to learn, and everybody here has something to contribute. So this is thrilling. So falling into it, my law professor was Jo Bakker-Layert. She at one point worked as a general counsel at Christie's, and her stories were fascinating. However, she said there is no direct way into art law. You have to be Alice in Wonderland and just go through the, I don't know, a hole in the ground to get there, which did not sound like a safe way of proceeding. I'm happy to report that since those days, there have been more and more classes offered in different schools. Most recently, to the best of my knowledge, University of Virginia Law School has started offering a course taught by Bill Sharon. And I'm showing you a snapshot from Harvard Law School's page because I think the way they are handling their legacy is quite interesting. The faculty who started their art law practice or art law course is now emeritus. His curriculum, his syllabus is still though preserved on the Harvard's website. Either they're very worldly and forward-looking, or they just haven't found that page that needs to be removed. But I think it's good to have that content back from 2001 online. All right, where can one learn art law? Through the books. Two covers you probably have recognized. One is a book that one of our speakers wrote. The other is a book that the other speaker wrote. And there's a brand new art law review that just launched with interesting survey coverage of art law topics. And a PDF of it is available in your handouts and online. And if you want a hard copy, that is also available. But for a little bit more, okay. Teaching art law, learning art law happens in for-profit settings. There's a conference called Legal Issues in Museum Administration. It's continued learning for both attorneys and non-attorneys. It could happen or take place in nonprofit setting. Lawyers Committee for Cultural Heritage Preservation is doing a lot of wonderful programs when they're not affected by pandemic. It can be in a law school setting. So for example, DePaul College of the Law has a very robust curriculum. They have Patty Gerstenblatt on their staff or team, professional team, and she has written a number of wonderful textbooks, including one that's mentioned in the handouts. Or you can take courses in non-law setting. Teachers College at Columbia University has 2 law and the arts classes for their students. And on, professional organizations for lawyers, professional organizations for non-lawyers. There are so many courses being offered every day, every year. Save the date for the upcoming event at the New York City Bar Association. It's just, is it too much? Can you say I've learned it, or you have to continue taking classes, staying current? We don't know. And another thing I wanted to share with you, there are also certificates that are being offered now. Most recently, Art and Cultural Heritage Law Certificate Program with Georgetown. It's international, it's all over the place. And right now, we are competing with a book launch that Institute of Art and Law is hosting to discuss, or as the second edition of their Museums and the Holocaust textbook. The reason I'm showing you Queen Mary website is because they are now offering an LLM program in art, business, and law in partnership with Institute of Art Law. So there are lots of these interesting overlaps, and presumably there is appetite for learning, and so there is a need for teaching art law. All right, with that in mind, and with all your books in your saved boxes and on your bookshelves, what does it mean to teach art law and now online? Our first speaker is Judith Prowda. She is a long-time friend now. She is a practitioner based in New York City, and she is a member of the Sotheby's Institute of Art Masters of Art Business faculty since 2007. Judith authored her book, Visual Arts and the Law. And Judith, would you please tell us about your experience teaching art law and why do you do it?
Well, I do it because I love it, and it's really I've been teaching art law at Sotheby's Institute since 2007, as Irina said, and it's over the years I've found that the students have been more and more interested in art law, and I always have a full class, and they've added classes for other departments besides art business, and so it's also I teach for the Centro program in Mexico, because we have a relationship with the Centro program in Mexico City, and as well as London, Sotheby's in London. So I've been teaching quite a bit recently, and there's just also during the summer I teach some short courses that are available to students who are interested, who may not be lawyers or who are lawyers and looking to make a transition into art law. So it's a very, very, very active teaching life that I have. I didn't expect it to blossom as it has, but it has over the years. Also, Irina's Center for Art Law is in part responsible, I think, for this great interest in art law. I think she's made it very accessible to not only lawyers and law students, but my own students and interested people from all over the world. So that's really wonderful. And there's so many opportunities, and Irina named just some of them. And I'm just thrilled by teaching it. I'm always learning from my students. I might add that my students are not in law school, so I'm not teaching law students. And so it may be very different from what Bert is going to be describing in his experience. They're students who are earning a master's degree in art business. Most of them have never studied the law, so there's this very steep learning curve for many of the students. For many of my students, English is not their native language. And in fact, half of my students usually are not from the United States. So in the online environment, we have students from really every continent, except Antarctica, I guess. And which leads to really interesting class discussions and perspectives. So it's very exciting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We are welcoming questions, and full bios of both speakers are available online. I wanted to give you a little bit of a mise en scène, what Judith does and who her students are. And our second guest today is Professor Herbert Lazerow, who has been teaching for a few decades out in California. So what we've accomplished is we have kind of spanned the United States. We have New York and California covered, and both Professor Lazerow and Professor Prowda, they have written books for their students. So Professor Lazerow, would you present yourself a little bit of how come you have fallen into teaching art law? Was it intentional? And can you tell us about who your students are and what are the expectations that you set for them?
Well, I'm teaching art law as a result of a midlife crisis. Some men, when they reach a certain age, get a young blonde or a red sports car. I decided that was too expensive, and I decided instead to take up a new course. My wife is an artist. I've taught property and tax, so art law seemed an interesting thing to go into. I want to, first of all, echo what Judith said. Most people who go into art law do so because they love the subject and they love teaching it. And second, Irina has made an enormous contribution to the world of art law by establishing her center. The significant question that you ask yourself when you go into teaching is the same question that every lawyer asks himself when he goes into court or when he tries to persuade somebody to do something. What is the nature of the person that I'm talking to? As a result of that, I suspect that if you went into Judith's class, which is basically people who are working in the art law business but are not lawyers, you would have a very different experience than if you went into one of my law school classes. Let me give you an illustration. In the course of discussing the movement of art across international boundaries, the students read and discuss first the Schultz case, where a prominent New York artifact dealer was convicted of violating the National Stolen Property Act and sent to jail. And then we read the Gold Fiali case, where as a result of a violation of the customs law, Michael Steinhardt had to forfeit a gold fiali worth about $1 million to the United States government so that they could return it to Italy. When I teach law students, after we have discussed the Fiali case, what I want to do is to put them in two situations. I want to put them in the situation of a transaction lawyer. And so I ask, in the contract where Michael Steinhardt bought the Fiali, there is a specific clause expressly warranting that the seller had title to it. Why would you put that in the contract? So I want them to confront the question of what you do ex ante in that sort of situation. But then I want to turn around and make them litigators. And so I ask, okay, you've got this wonderful warranty. Is it worth anything? Michael Steinhardt has to give up the Fiali. Can you sue the seller? And that leads to a long discussion about, is the UCC applicable? Is the Convention on Contracts for the International Sale of Goods applicable? There's no choice of forum clause in the contract, so you're going to have to go sue where you get jurisdiction, primarily in Italy, which means that your New York lawyer is going to have to hire an Italian lawyer. If you win, will you get lawyers' fees? So that's the sort of discussion that we have in a law school class. When I teach this to undergraduates, it's an entirely different discussion. I want to talk with undergraduates about the policy behind the customs law. The question is it a good idea to have civil forfeiture for violation of the customs law? You could lose an enormous amount for what in this case is no deprivation of the United States government of its tariff, because there is no tariff on incoming art law. But of course, there is a prohibition on the import of stolen property. So that's the sort of contrast you get depending on what your student body is.
Thank you. It's a question to both of you. Do you get to talk to other faculty that teaches art law? Is that, or teaching art law is kind of a solo undertaking, and you keep track of the publications, but don't necessarily exchange war stories or ask for advice on pedagogy?
Well, I mean, I enjoy speaking with you, Irina.
Thank you.
You're teaching. Is certainly, I love speaking to other art law faculty and faculty in general. At Sotheby's, I feel very fortunate because my colleagues are teaching other topics related to art, and so I can benefit from them, and I can share some of my stories and hear about some of the problems in the market and our historical questions, and so many questions overlap with the market. Of course, my students are earning a degree in art business, and we're focused towards the market. So it's very interesting to see a combination of perspectives and so many. Also, my students, I many students from China and from all over the world. So, and now with the pandemic, I sometimes invite guest speakers from other parts of the world to participate, and so that adds also another very interesting context for my students. I hope I answered your question. I'm not sure if I remember what it is.
Sure.
Yes, I love speaking with anybody who teaches art law, and so many of my colleagues now are teaching art law classes in law school and non-law school environments, and so it's very interesting to share, to compare notes with them as well. So it's always an exchange of ideas. I think that's how we built the field and continue to build it, and that's how the field grows. And hopefully we are turning out students that are responsible art market professionals and lawyers in the field, and that they're benefiting.
Bert, what about you? Do you have somebody to?
It's a terrible lack that's experienced at every law school, because no law school can afford to have more than one art law professor, and most law schools have none. What I make up for that with is by pestering my colleagues in related fields. So they're always astonished when I come to them with an art law problem. For instance, my colleague who teaches international litigation is probably tired of seeing me because so many art law problems turn out to be international litigation problems with a twist. Likewise, my intellectual property colleagues, whom I pester about copyright problems, my tax colleagues to whom I talk about tax problems. Oh, I didn't realize there was an art law wrinkle to that. So you make do as you can, but boy, it would be a great service to set up an national art law teachers blog.
Louise, are you taking notes? This is a great suggestion, and I think we are seeing more aspiring teachers, and we're seeing more courses being offered. And yes, it's very difficult to have experts on both cultural heritage and contemporary art issues, and in one faculty or in one institution. Both of you were very kind to say that Center for Art Law is a good resource, and I agree, we have our days and uses. One of the fears that I have is that we're kind of giving people a false hope that once you take a course on art law as a lawyer, for example, as a law student, or once you intern with the Center for Art Law, because we have a very robust internship program, and we get wonderful students to work with us and wonderful applicants whom we can take, that we are sort of giving a guarantee or a promise that once you've done this training, you can actually go out and get a job and become an art lawyer, which is a very difficult field to be compensated in. But it's a vast field that I've noticed that, there are lots of clients who need assistance, but most of these clients can't really afford legal fees. So is there a danger of overpromising by giving more and more classes and certificates and publishing books that are $300, $400 a pop?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm not teaching law students, so I don't have to have that guilt hanging over my head because my students are not going to go out. But some of them do go to law school, and I often get the question, should I go to law school after graduating from Sotheby's Institute of Art? And sometimes I get questions from students who are applying to Sotheby's Institute of Art and asking whether they should go to law school or go to Sotheby's Institute of Art. And these are very difficult questions. Usually they know the answers if they ask themselves. And so I may have a discussion with them, and their own answers somehow surface, they emerge because they're thinking more deeply about it, and they're confronting these issues. But of course, there's no guarantee with any field that you are going into in law school, that any course that you're taking in law school, that you're going to end up practicing that field. I think that I never took an art law course, not in law school. There was none that existed, and but I took courses that related to art law, copyright, of course, and some trademark and agency, and there are many tax, and there are many courses, UCC, sales, and secure transactions, and there and property, of course. There are many courses that intersect somehow with art, and really art law is not necessarily a single field. I mean, it's really many fields that somehow create a body of law, and that is known as the field of art law.
Thank you. Bert, what about you? Do you feel like how many students do you have in your class every semester? And do you feel like you're leading them down this false trail?
It varies from 10 to 25. And I would start with the proposition, not only are you not guaranteed that you're going to be able to find an art law job, there is no, what you might call, entry level to art law. But my other observation is that I don't know that there are very many people in the country who practice exclusively art law. Very typically, one will do art law and estate planning, one will do art law and copyright. Even if you are the general counsel for a major museum, I'm betting that you're going to spend more than 50% of your time on employee relations law, not art law. So it's a problem. What I say to students, and especially since we have a lot of students who are unwilling to leave San Diego, you are going, if you want to practice art law, you are going to have to build your clientele. Or as a friend of mine put it, if you're a lawyer who has a book of business, everybody wants you. So you're going to have to, for instance, do pro bono work for people in the art world in order to develop a clientele. There's an art lawyer in San Francisco who did pro bono work for a guy who had painted a mural on the side of a wall, and the owner of the property eventually decided that he was tired of that mural and whitewashed it. She filed a suit under the Visual Artists' Rights Act, collected $200,000, and yes, that suit was not pro bono. It was a contingent fee suit. So one can be pretty clear with students that this is not the royal road to riches. If you want the royal road to riches, you should go to business school, not law school.
How do you choose which subjects? Do you change the curriculum every semester? That's a question for both of you. Or do you have 10 core subjects that you cover in the first 10 classes and then maybe do a project with your students? What's the line of thinking in selecting materials?
Well, for me, I teach. Sorry, I teach a 2-semester course. So I which is not typically the case in law school. Most law schools, art law is 1 semester. You're lucky to, if at all, you're lucky to get a 1-semester course in art law. So I teach 2 semesters, and so the first semester, I start out with I actually follow, or maybe my book follows my course, or my course follows my book. I don't know. It's kind of fit together that way. But I start out with a question of what is art in the legal context, and I talk about the famous Brancusi case and the Haunch of Venison case, and so I talk about those cases and the different approaches in the U.S. and the UK. I try to be as international as I can whenever it's possible, and then I go fairly chronologically in the life cycle of a work of art. So a work of art is created, and so therefore you need to consider copyright issues and the creation and the creativity of works and the protection of the work and that whole process. And then a work is, the copyright may be infringed. And so that's a wonderful opportunity to talk about some of these fabulous fair use cases. Students love copyright fair use cases. They're very interesting, I think, because they relate to artists appropriating and the creative process as artists approach creating works of art, and they're always very colorful, and visual. So that's always great too. So we talk about some of those cases, and then a work typically enters into the primary market. It's sold. So that we talk about fiduciary relationship between the artist and the gallery, and the kinds of contracts and some of the promises and breaches of fiduciary duty that occur. And then we have, I typically, as much as I can, try to interweave this with very interesting student participation negotiations, mock negotiations as much as possible. And so that students love that. And that works actually very well on remotely. And then work eventually may go into the secondary market. So I do separate classes for galleries that sell privately and for auction houses. And those are very different scenarios. And then a work may be stolen and forged and all kinds of issues. Everything that happens to a work of art in its entire life cycle, then it's their tax issues, and it may be bequeathed, it may end up in a museum, and so there's so many. So I try to take it that way. And so the first semester, it's really the life cycle of a work of art in the market. And the second semester, I focus on policy and ethical issues. And students love that also, that dimension. And it's very interesting because I have students who are starting in January that just had my first class yesterday. And so I have a whole slew of new students that are joining us. And I feel that that they're not disadvantaged really. That's not really, you don't really have to take Art Law 1 to take Art Law 2. And so I think that you can really start anywhere along the continuum and appreciate the different areas of art law.
Thank you. Bert, what about you? How do you structure your class?
I've started out structuring my class very similar to the way Judith does her class, starting out with what is art from a legal point of view, then a whole bunch of chapters on the rights and responsibilities of artists, copyright, right of publicity, right of privacy, tax, moral rights, etc. Then a section on what you might call the commercial art world, authentication, title, relationship with agents. Then a chapter on museum law, and then a number of chapters on how the United States protects its cultural heritage. I very quickly revised that course to put the international aspects of the course up front. So now, after I do what is art, I then do art in war and the movement of art across international boundaries in peacetime. The reason that I made that change is purely pedagogical, not logical. I made the change because I wanted to emphasize to the students how international the art world is. And that seems to have worked reasonably well. The other thing that I think is important is to keep the students' anticipation up, and the students are all hot for authentication and for the treatment of stolen art. And so this has the advantage of keeping their interest toward the end of the course. And I'm green with envy of Judith for having 6 credits.
That's right. Yes. Well, actually, more than that, because I teach the capstone projects as well, and often students, whether they may be writing a thesis or a project that's related to art law, but they also may be starting. They may be writing a
I'm worried about
project.
the comfort level of these shoes, Ty.
Yeah.
If somebody's not speaking, if you don't mind.
Sneakers. Even.
So, so some of the students who are preparing business plans, for example, may have all kinds of questions, legal questions relating to the business they're proposing. So, I really do it all year round. I never stop doing it. So, and I do change the course. I add classes, I add cases. You don't have room for everything, and so you have to make some decisions. Unfortunately, you can't cover absolutely everything in even 1 year. So but I do get 30 weeks to teach classes in all different areas.
That's a very interesting distinction. If there is more time, there's definitely more materials to be presented. As a follow-up, and I think, Bert, you're a bit devious, keeping the best or most hot topics until the end. That's a great trick. I might try to use it in my classes.
That is very interesting. I never thought of that, but yeah, it is a good idea. But I think that if you, I think everything's so interesting. So I try to keep the students excited throughout the terms.
What about keeping up with new cases and developments? Because the news papers and blogs and online publications are producing more and more content. For example, amount of articles we received on deaccessioning and issues concerning museums. There was a huge proliferation. Do you try to condense it for your students, or do you just tell them, if you're interested, go do your own research? Similarly, fraud cases in the art market. There are many, many examples. Do you need to know of all these examples, or just one is sufficient for the teaching purposes?
Well, I mean, you can't cover everything, of course. You have to make some choices. If there are some active cases, I think it's very exciting for the students to follow them. for example, when the Knoedler Gallery cases were going on, that was very exciting for the class, and we talked about that even if we were not talking about forgery in any single week. So the students were following it, and some of us attended the trial, and so that was very exciting. And then there are other cases, such as the 5 Points case, for example, that that students were following, and we, you know, I invited guest speakers who an expert witness who served as an expert, a friend of mine who served as an expert witness on the case, and so I guess being in New York, you have the opportunity to invite people physically when we had classes in person to the class, and students were able to engage with them one-on-one after class and in person. So that was very exciting. So I try to keep things very current where I can, and so yeah, so it's a full-time job to stay up to date. That I can say that I spend a lot of time reading all about art law. There's so many wonderful blogs and specialized papers. There's the art newspaper, of course, that covers legal issues. There's ArtNet. There's so many, and plus the usual press. I mean, this New York Times, the Wall Street Journal.
Sure, right. So
all of that.
It feels to us that we're doing a lot of filtering for the benefit of our readers, and it is fatiguing. But Bert, what do you have any recommendations or comments on this proliferation of information and cases? And is there a trick to keeping the noise manageable?
No, you just have to be able to read fast. We are very fortunate in that art law news seems to be of general interest to the public. So things tend to appear in the New York Times that don't appear in comparable other areas of the law. But one of the questions that I've always had is, how do you keep up with all the legal developments that don't appear in the public press? And I don't have a good answer to that. You just have to be very active and read and share with other people who teach art law.
Also, I think that participating in conferences is a very good idea, or you know, attending or participating with your colleagues. There in these instances, in these environments, you can really keep up a good deal with what's going on. Also, being a member of a bar committee is another way to exchange ideas with your fellow art lawyers, colleagues, and so those are truly advantages. Every art the bar association has some kind of art law committee. I mean, whether it's the city bar or the New York State Bar Association. I'm co-chair of the Fine Arts Committee, and we are constantly in touch. We hold all kinds of meetings, whether they're CLE or regular luncheon programs that are open to the public, and the ABA, and there's so many opportunities to learn about art law.
Right, and so there's
is that sometimes there's a judgment rendered that you can't get a hold of. For instance, a French court is now considering the validity and continued utility of an agreement entered into between a French Holocaust survivor and the University of Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
When the court renders its judgment, I'm sure there'll be a little squib in the New York Times, but how do I get my hands on the court's opinion?
There is a nonprofit organization out there that tries to get all these complaints and decisions together. And we invite you guys, if there's something you think missing from our list of in the case corner, to share that with you. But yes, it is for jurisdictions that are not in English and that maybe have different public access policies. It is quite difficult. There are a few interesting, well, there are a number of questions that were posted, but one question, how your teaching has changed over the course of the 2020 academic year with COVID affecting maybe enrollment and maybe attention of the students. Bert, would you take it first?
I don't think it's changed at all. Oh, well, let me take that back. One of the things that has changed is that attendance since COVID has been perfect. Apparently, whatever distracted students from going to class, like Surf's Up today, is not keeping them away from class. But I'm basically teaching the same course that I'd always taught. Let me just add, I think it's important from the student's point of view to be as current as you can. So in my teaching materials, which I revise every year, I give them a list of the artists whose work has been reattributed during the previous year. And it's usually 15 or 20 artists that they've heard of. And that gives them an idea of the activity that's going on in the field of art law.
That's very true. In fact, I just read an article this last night or this morning, I can't remember when, but about a Rembrandt that was reattributed to Rembrandt in Allentown, Pennsylvania, after having been conserved. So attribution is not static. That's for sure. What was the question? It had to do with
how your teaching or
right.
experience changed.
Okay. Well, yes. Well, we transitioned right immediately to the online environment as soon in March. So from 1 minute to the next, I was teaching, in person, and then the next week I was teaching online. So it was a real scramble in the beginning because nobody knew how to use Zoom, and so we had extra sessions with our learning, our digital learning department, which was very beneficial. And so it really, in a sense, it was really seamless. We just transferred everything to online. But there are certain things that changed, of course. The students didn't see each other anymore. A lot of them had to go back to their countries. People were isolated. I mean, this occurred not only, I mean, this occurred throughout the world. So, but I think that once you learn how to use Zoom, you can use all kinds of things in Zoom that are very helpful. There are these breakout rooms that can be very helpful. It worked quite well in the spring semester. We were able to finish the semester, and students were quite pleased with the experience. What was challenging and what we were concerned about in the summer was how it was going to be in the fall. And much to our surprise, actually, our enrollment grew. And I think it's very interesting because we have students that would otherwise not be able to attend Sotheby's Institute of Art. People who were putting off going to graduate school because of their professional and personal lives did not make that a possibility. So we have students with very interesting backgrounds who are doing other things. And I think that's one of the things that I've noticed in the fall semester. Also, some students who may have put off enrolling in the fall because they thought everything was going to open up in the spring are now doing their first semester in the spring, and having spoken with students who attended in the fall, they felt reassured that the quality of the teaching and the experience was really very high. So we have a very full course this year, and so that's very exciting. The other thing that I've seen is that the international scope of the student body has expanded, and that's wonderful. Some of the points that make it challenging is, for example, the students don't know us, we don't know the students, and the students don't know each other. So it's really takes a lot of effort, and I think students really are ending up with a wonderful quality of education, and they have the time to do it. As Bert was saying, they have the time. And this is actually an ideal time to be in school, because you're continuing to learn. You're able to do it at home, at your in your own environment, where you wouldn't be able to travel and go to school in another city or another country. And I think that after the pandemic, and there will be an after the pandemic, that you'll have a jump start in the job market. At least I hope for my students who are entering art business jobs.
Thank you. There were a couple of questions I'll try to consolidate. Before I do that, I just want to say we have really active chat happening, which I find a bonus of using Zoom. And we also have a number of some of the guests I don't know, I apologize in advance, but some I do, and we have a number of teachers and professors of art law with us. And so this is a really delightful opportunity to say hello to Carol Steinberg and to Walter Lehman, whose book I was going to show as an excellent recent contribution to our teaching toolkit, exactly. And Harry Martin is listening in, whom I mentioned earlier. So it's really very nice to see the continued interest. If you are teaching and I don't see you on my screen, please make it known that you're with us and contribute your suggestions on materials and how we can shape these conversations and the teaching experience to make it better.
Well, two questions. My longstanding colleague Carol Steinberg, who's I've known for many years, and she's also co-chair with me of the Fine Arts Committee of the New York State Bar Association. We've held so many programs together over the years, and so it's wonderful to see Carol here and to see the other faculty that teach this wonderful topic.
You know, I teach in an art school. I teach artist rights in an art school, and it's a real challenge because these kids, don't really want to take a law class, but it's really, really important. So I encourage everybody to do that. And honestly, that's how I learned it. I literally outlined Judith Prowda's book, when I started teaching it, and that's how I learned it. But it's a really great thing to do. It's so important because they need so much help.
A question about writing textbooks about art law. Why write another one unless it's, let's say, public art and law? Because I don't think there's a textbook on this subject. Museum administration, law and practice, that has not been seriously dealt with in a while. But why write another art law textbook? I know, Bert, you had a great answer when we were discussing this. Why did you write your book?
Well, because I thought there was an opportunity to present something that hadn't already been presented. For instance, if you know nothing about the art law field and you want to dip your toe in and find out what it's all about, you reach for the nutshell. If you are already an experienced practitioner and you want the details, you reach for either Lerner and Bressler or Darabee or Duboff. But there's a vast space in between where you want a little more than the nutshell gives you, but you don't want to wade through 1,800 pages of fine text. And that's where Judith and my books come in. And each of us has a little bit of a different take. Judith is much more rule oriented than I am. And I am much more helping students analyze the individual cases and statutes. So you write another book because in my case, I wrote another book because I went looking for a book that covered what I wanted to cover and I didn't find it.
Well, I had actually more content to include in my book. In fact, I had written 3 additional chapters that never made it into the book because it became too long. And I had written a chapter on museums, and I had written a chapter on cultural property, and I had also written a chapter on dispute resolution. So those are areas that I think that are, that were so interesting to include in the book. Maybe we could have done 2 volumes, but I think that the publisher was not able to do it at the time, and maybe if I have the energy sometime in the future, my non-existent free time, I'll write a second edition and include those topics. Of course, everything's all changed by now. But it's by writing a book, I think that you relearn the way you understand it, and it helps you teach it better. And I think that it also helps my students. I wrote it really. I was asked to write it, and I wrote it for my students and for people who are in the profession and people who want to understand art law. So it's written for. It's not written too technically, so that I think it's accessible. That was my hope, that it would be accessible to people who have an interest in art law, professionals and non-professionals.
Thank you. I know that we usually say the program is an hour. Sometimes if people want to stay and our speakers are willing to spend another 10, 15 minutes, we can extend the program. But if you can't stay, I'm very grateful to all of you who were able to join us today and choose this program over some other worthy, interesting, maybe family undertaking. I want to put this slide up. If you are not subscribing to our newsletter, you should. You're welcome to come to our future webinars, and then once business resumes, in live in-person events. And please make suggestions. If you feel like a case is missing from our case corner, we want to have it there, and we didn't omit it on purpose, I think. Likewise, for books and publications, we keep track as carefully as we can with the resources that we have. So if there's something you think we should have, or an article that we may want to write, please let us know. We have really wonderful group of students this spring. We had a wonderful team of students in the fall. Our students are looking for suggestions. So if you have feedback on how we can improve the resources, please do. If you want to stay a few minutes, Judith, Bert, is that okay? Do you have?
Oh yeah, no, I'm happy to stay. I'm happy to stay.
Thank you. Thank you. And I wanted to make sure to thank our team and to thank our executive director, Louise, for incredible work that has been done and is being done every day. You have no idea the amount of, the volume of work that is on those shoulders. So Louise, thank you very much for all the webinars that have been and the webinars that are coming up. We know you can do it, and we're really indebted to you for making it seamless and really valuable.
I have to thank both of you, Louise and Irina, for organizing this event. It's really an opportunity to hear from other academics and people who are interested in art law, students and professionals who are interested in the topic.
Ditto. I've got a whole series of notes from this presentation.
Great.
So there is a handout that has been put together by one of our interns, Lucy Shu, who is on the call still, I believe. Thank you very much for your work on this program and others. The handout has links to, we're not recommending these books, but we think you may find them interesting, and you may find, that set of tools for your teaching or learning purposes there. Back to the questions that we received. What really is the difference between teaching and applying art law learning to professionals and to, I suppose, academic learning and professional practical learning? Is there a difference? And how can you maybe verbalize it, direct your students in a more theoretical direction or more practical direction? Is it something that you can address? You know,
By practical, do you mean while they're working in the art field, or?
Well, sometimes you can assign a research paper, for example.
Oh, right. Yes.
Or have a presentation, or work on a particular case in detail, look at dicta and look at the dissent as an exercise rather than as a, I guess, a practical approach. Bert, Judith, what do you think?
Well, I since my students are not law students, I try to engage them at where it matters to them, and I think that my students use the materials immediately in the work and in their professional lives. So some of my students are already working in the field, maybe working at an auction house, maybe working at a gallery, and some of them immediately develop skills that they can use, for example, in negotiating contracts. And although they may not be lawyers, although some of them are lawyers, I do have sometimes I have students who are actually lawyers. Sometimes they've earned their degree in another country. But they are using those skills right away. So I think that is a real positive outcome for them. I hope I answered your question.
If I'm teaching continuing legal education, or if I'm teaching people who are already working in the field, there's going to be much more emphasis on what the rules of law are and how you manipulate those rules of law. If I'm teaching law students, I'm going to be much more focused on legal method as applied in the art law field. The best of all possible worlds that I've had a couple of times is I have had retired lawyers sitting in on my art law class.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great because they tend to bring the students down to earth. And the advantage that they bring is that I'm just a professor. What do I know? Whereas they've actually been out there in the trenches. And so when they say something, the students take it seriously.
I'm practicing laws also, so, and as well as mediation and arbitration. So I try to bring my professional experience into the classroom whenever I can. And I think that students really do enjoy that. And when I have guest speakers, they tend to do that as well. And so that I think that adds another dimension. Absolutely.
There have been a number of developments in the art market over the last year, surprisingly, including anti-money laundering directives that went into effect in Europe and that have just gone into effect halfway in the United States. It seems that the practitioners, not only lawyers, need to read up and maybe get their brains wrapped around the Bank Secrecy Act, but also members of the art trade. How do you recommend teaching dealers that they have certain new obligations? And how do you recommend teaching collectors not to balk at the idea that once asked for example, their passport and these extra questions that need to be posed for due diligence purposes? It's all part of the general teaching and general change in the patterns. So what's the way, do you think, that we can be of use?
Bert, do you want to start?
Well, I think the first problem with collectors is actually reaching them. With dealers, most of them belong to associations, and those professional associations are going to want speakers who can talk to the latest requirements of their profession. I think that with regard to individual collectors, one has to educate the dealers who deal with those collectors and who are going to have to explain to them why they need lots of personal information and why their dealer is going to have to disclose to government agencies that they have bought an artwork for more than $10,000.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that the students I'm teaching are future art market leaders, and so they are. What I teach in my classroom, hopefully, it's you know, it gets passed on to their clients, and we all become more informed. I think it takes time. I mean, these are some of the issues. I mean, in many, this is an extremely important field to, as Irina said. I mean, this is evolving in the United States, and so we need to keep up to date and to pass that information along to our students, either whether they're law students or whether they're learning about the art business. It's extremely important. And other academic settings and professional bar association programs and other programs, this information can be, you can learn about this, and hopefully, will reach the collectors and people the art market participants who really need to know. Before people have a problem. The idea is to get people to get people the information so that they can avoid having a problem later on.
I wonder if somebody is too young or too old to learn about art law. So, for example, should I be exposing, I am, my 8-year-old to art law? Or vice versa, if somebody's grandparent is collecting antiquities, is it too late to tell them that maybe they need to figure out what they should or should not be acquiring? So is there an age limit, or is there just a different way of presenting this information?
I think that it's never too early or too late. So I think that teaching art law issues to your child, I think that's great. I mean, you can certainly teach them lessons when you're going through a museum, and they learn as they go. And I think that it actually teaching art law issues to people who have been collectors throughout their lifetime. I think that's there's still much to learn, and I think that they're very grateful to learn about it, and you can learn from them as well. You can gain a lot of insight.
If I may say something, for those of you who do have kids and who want to teach them about art law, there is this book that Irina mentioned, and I realized that I grew up with it in my household back in France, and it's about forgeries and like fake artworks. And my mom sent it to me a couple of months ago, and it's kind of a like investigation into a collection, and it's called Un scandale au musée in French, but I believe it's called The Great Art Scandal in English, and I think it's available on Amazon. So I can add that to the reading material for today's program.
Absolutely.
Writing a children's book, that's another goal that perhaps I'll add to my list.
If this is a question to our listeners, audience, if you have more comments to share, please do. If you have questions you'd like to pose, now is a moment to do it. Do remember there are other events coming up, for example, fraudsters in the art market. We're talking about lessons that the art trade seems to be resistant to learning. We'll talk about taxes and appraisal later this spring. So if it's something that you care about, please join us, and keep an eye on the calendar. last thing I would like to do, I have an agenda, obviously. We're looking to expand our clinical offerings. So last year we launched an immigration clinic, and it was very helpful to, I think, over 50 artists attended. Lots of attorneys volunteered their time and answered questions. And this year we are hoping to introduce at least one more, although there are 3 candidates for topics, this one being estate planning for artists. And so if this is something you care about, feel strongly, if you're a lawyer with knowledge and a little bit of free time, send us a message. We'll let you know what's cooking. And there's so much learning to be done, and hopefully application of that learning. So thank you. Thank you all for being here, for donating to this event. We are very humbled to have gathered this great, interested, and just wonderful group of interested people. It's like-minded humans. That's what I get happy about, and that's the reason I am happy to continue the discussion for hours on end. All right, no more questions. Please write to us if you want to get in touch with our guests. Their information is in the handouts, I believe. Feedback is great. See you soon, I hope. Bert, Judith, thank you. Louise, thank you so much for making this an experiment reality, which I think worked out. So
thank you, everyone.
Thank
Keep an eye
you.
out for our email with the follow-up survey. You'll get the handouts again, links to register to our upcoming programs, everything. So thank you for being great attendees, great audience, and for all your great questions as well. Bert, Judith, thank you. Irina as well, and Carol, thank you for your comments. Beautiful, beautiful community out here. I love it. Thank you.
Thank
See you
you.
tomorrow.
Everyone.